SASS has 8 built-in functions for working with numbers. Now, we've already talked about functions in one of our previous chapters, but I'm going to review them here since they have to do with math and deal specifically with numbers. We're going to be working on the same file that we were working with before, so we'll just deal with our 2 nested boxes. I'm going to change the value of my num to be equal to 5. For the width of our box, we're going to go ahead and set this to be a percentage. So I'm going to use the percentage function, and then in parentheses I'm going to pass on my num times 20, which should give us a value of 100. Now, as you can see, my box 2 is very, very long. If we check in our compiled code, you can see that the width is set to 10,000%. That's because it's using percentage here. So it's taking my num, which is 5, multiplying it by 20, which is giving me 100, and then it's turning that into a percentage, so it's giving us 10,000. So if I wanted this to simply be 100, I would actually need to take my num and divide it by 5. And now if we save and refresh, you can see that the box is set to 100%. So it's filling all of the space that we have available. Now our margin is no longer working because I had changed the value of the my_num variable to simply just 5. It's not rendering as pixels or m's anymore. So all the percentage built-in function is going to do is it's going to turn a unitless number into a percentage. If I took the value of the margin, which remember is not being rendered, and we just wrapped this inside of the percentage function, it would then change whatever the value of this calculation into a percentage. So here you can see it changes that to 50%, which is clearly too big for our page, but now it is rendering in the correct way. I'll divide my num by 100, which is going to give me a percentage value that will result in 5% margin. That's a little bit better for the room that we have available on our page. Percentage is a great built-in function to use when you're creating responsive designs. Now if I take a number to divide in the width, which is not going to produce a whole number, for instance, if I divide 3 into the value of my num, which is 5, you'll see that the box value becomes a very strange number. It's going to be 166.66667. We can use our round function, which is going to round the number to the nearest whole number. I'm going to change percentage here to round. The size of the box is going to change because I'm no longer using percentage. So if I refresh, you can see that the width is not actually producing any feasible results. That's because the value of my num is too small. Let's change the value of my num back to 100. And we're going to need to change our margin settings. I'm just going to set this back to 0.5 m's. And we'll just focus on our width right now. So now I'm dividing 3 into 100 and I'm rounding the results. If we save and we refresh, you can see that the value of the width is producing 33, but it's being crossed off, and that's because it's not producing any sort of units. So I would need to specify units here. So I'm going to just go into my num value, and I'm going to give this 100 pixels as the units. Now you can see it's going to give us a result of 33 pixels. It's rounding this. If I didn't have the round function, this would produce results that are going to be 33.333. In addition to rounding numbers, you can also use the seal and the floor to round up or down. So here I'm going to wrap this, and before we actually wrap that and look at seal, let's make this number a little bit bigger. I'm going to make the value of my num 195. And if we save and refresh, you can see that the width is now going to be 65 pixels. Let's divide this by 2 so that we have a number that will produce some decimals. Okay, now we have 97.5. Now, if I go ahead and I wrap this calculation inside of the seal built-in function, and we save and refresh, you're going to notice that this number is going to change to 98 pixels. Seal is always going to round up, while floor is going to always round down. So if I change it to floor and I refresh, then this is going to go to 97 pixels. So we are not left with a decimal in either situation. It's just going to decide if it should round up or round down. If I change the value of my num to a negative number, so if we divide that negative number by 2, you can see that the width is not being calculated anymore, and that's because it can't divide 2 into this negative number. But what we can do here is we can change this value or control it by adding our absolute built-in function. When we add absolute and we refresh, now the number is going to change to 97.5. Absolute is going to do what you would expect. It's just going to return an absolute value of the number. So now, to show you how min and max work, we're going to change our value. I'm going to change my width setting here, and we're going to use min. I'm going to pass on 100 pixels, 150 pixels, and 199 pixels. If we save and we refresh, you're going to see that the box now is going to be 100 pixels. It's going to take the minimum number. So it just finds whatever the minimum number is, and obviously max is going to find whatever the maximum number is. So now our box should change to have a width of 199 pixels. That's the maximum number that it can be. The final built-in function that has to do with math is the random function. The random function is going to return a random number. If I simply pass on random and open and close the parentheses and add a plus px, you can see that the width is going to change to a random number. Now by default, the function is going to return a number between 0 and 1. If we include a number inside of the parentheses, I'm going to put 253. I'll save and refresh. You can see that I get random results. It's going to go ahead this time and give me 213. The last thing that I want to point out here is that I concatenated on the plus px to the random function. I needed to specify that this was going to be pixels. If I neglected to put this on and just left it at random and saved, you can see that the value of width is being crossed off. It's not going to calculate that information correctly because it doesn't know what sort of units it should be. So I need to add the plus px so that it'll render out as pixels. Or I could change it and render it out as ems or something else. And you can see that every time I do this, I'm getting different values that are populating inside of this field. Operating on numbers and generating results from the number functions can be very handy. It works really well when you're trying to maintain proportions in a responsive design, and it can save you from having to perform the math involved in dividing one variable by another or calculating how many pixels a gutter should be when the layout resizes.